Hello everyone, my name is Tia Marie, and this is Power N Blaso. Today I have Dr. Shena with me, and we're going to be talking about a sensitive topic. It might be triggering for some. We will be discussing sexual abuse and trauma and ways to go about healing. Here we go. So here we are, Dr. Shena. This is Power N Blaso. Thanks again for being here. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, so thank you so much for having me here. It's my pleasure to support you and your platform. My name is Dr. Shena. I am soft-spoken but powerful. I am a body-inclusive and holistic psychologist, a trauma-informed consultant and yoga teacher, and an energy healer. And I have a private practice in Inglewood, California, in the Los Angeles area called Embodied Truth Healing and Psychological Services, where I hold sacred healing space for Black, Indigenous, POC, queer folks, creatives, healers, and I love my work. Really, it centers believing the body, and that if we live enough life, the stories get wedged in our bodies. And if we can connect with the body as medicine, it'll deepen our healing experience. So really about the holistic healing life.
Well, that's beautiful. And I actually have some questions about how to heal after some of the traumatizing things that we will be discussing. So I think this is a good time to get right into things. A couple of years ago, a friend came to me about a really tough experience. She was talking about being molested as a child, and I didn't know how to respond. All I did was listen, but my question is, how do you support somebody who comes to you about their experiences with sexual trauma?
Yeah, this is such an important question. And as we're journeying forward, discussing sexual trauma, I just want to share with your audience that, different things can come up, right? Like hearing what you and I will be discussing and some of the stories that we'll share between us might be hard. And so I really encourage your audience and anyone listening or watching to take care of themselves in that if they need to take a break and come back to it another time, or perhaps, only listen to a little bit or none at all, that's okay, right? That's part of being able to make informed choices for ourselves. So what should you do? How should you support a friend who's come to you and confides in you that they've experienced some sort of sexual assault or sexual trauma? Well, I think one of the things that stands out in that question is that this person trusted you enough to share something so private and difficult with you. And so really hold that close to your heart, right? That takes a lot of trust and courage. Mm-hmm. And usually it says a lot about the nature of the relationship. It is often that we don't know what to say when someone shares something really painful with us. But I think the best thing to do in many cases is to just listen and to know that your presence is powerful. Your presence is enough sometimes. Sometimes people just want to be able to say what happened and be believed. So that would be the second piece, is to believe them, believe what they say. And the third thing I would say is to ask them what they need. Ask them how you can support them, right? So sometimes they might say, I just want you to listen. Can you hold my hand? Can you give me a hug? Sometimes they may say, I want to tell my parents, but I need support doing that. I'm nervous about how that's going to happen. how that's going to go, if they're going to believe me. Or they may say, I'd really like to talk to a therapist and I don't know where to start with that. And then sometimes, when people share with us what they need, we may or may not have the means to be able to support them in that. In those cases, we just say, I don't know much about finding a therapist, but I can find someone that does. I can help you connect with someone that does. So that's where I would say to start,
I know, especially like today, a lot of us are like super headstrong. We're like, you have to tell somebody. What do you do when like your friend is like really scared about coming forward and like holding people accountable?
Yeah. Part of the healing process, especially with sexual trauma, sexual assault, when folks experience sexual trauma, one of the first and most significant things that they lose is power and control, right? Because in the experience of sexual trauma, someone steals that from you. Someone takes that from you. And so whenever I'm holding space for survivors of sexual trauma, I really do as much as I can to support their need and reconnection and repair with their own sense of power and control. And one way we do that, one really powerful way to do that, is to respect the choices that they make. So as loved ones who care about them and as part of people's support squads, we can help them to become more aware what their choices are, what their options are, and then, and talk through them. What are the pros and cons of telling? What are the pros and cons of not telling? And then allow them to make the best choice for them. Right?
Right.
Sometimes that choice will change later.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to give people space to process it all.
Exactly, because they just went through something where they didn't have any power. So trying to force something on them, I don't feel like is the right way to go. So thank you for answering that. Okay, so here's another thing that's pretty blurred with some of the people my age. There seems to be some confusion on what consent really is. Some people think that coercion into sex doesn't equate to rape, that if you're both under the influence and you both agree that that's consent, could you please clear that up?
Yes, absolutely. So I like to describe consent as a full being experience.
Mm-hmm.
It is an agreement between your mind, your body, your heart, and your spirit. It is an agreement between all of those parts of ourselves that comes through as a verbal yes, a very clear yes. And so I say, is it a full body? Yes, right? Like we know when we really want to do something, when we really are excited about it. So those same sensations that come up when we're excited to say yes to something, those are sensations and feelings that we can look for when we're, not so clear if we're where our yes or no is. So consent means mind, body, heart, spirit agreement communicated as a verbal yes. Also, something interesting that I feel like sometimes, contributes to the blurriness or the murkiness, as you said, is that your yes can change. It can be right up to the point of it's about to go down, right? And you can change your mind and say no. Then there is no consent, right? You can be in the act, right? You can be doing what you do, and you decide you don't want to do it anymore. Your answer is then no, right? So if you can communicate no, there is no longer consent. So yes, no doesn't mean yes. Sometimes people in their own confusion, perhaps in their own wounds, and perhaps because of trauma, perhaps because of coercion or pressure, they may say yes when they mean no. And I think one of the most beautiful things we can do with ourselves is really learn what it feels like in ourselves and our bodies when we say yes, right? So if I took us in a meditation experience, I might be asking you, what does it feel like to say no in your body? Where do you feel that? Some people might say, I feel it in my shoulders, or I notice that my brow clenches a little bit. I notice in my belly, in my tummy, that it kind of feels like, scary butterflies, right? Whereas a yes, someone may say, I feel really grounded, I feel strong, I feel myself smiling, I feel lightness in my chest. So we want to be really clear about what that feels like for each of us. Now, coercion is a really important piece of this conversation. Amongst peers, I might say coercion is an aggressive form of peer pressure. It often involves a degree of emotional manipulation, sometimes blackmailing, sometimes gaslighting and confusing messages like, if you love me, then you'll do this. Don't you love me? Don't you want to show me how much you love me? Right? So essentially, coercion is the way that a person or people perhaps use their power, control, influence, their voice to manipulate or pressure someone to change their no into a yes, right? And really, it's about that person, that in that moment, there's a perception that they have more power and control, and sometimes they do, right? Sometimes, if it's a teacher that's being coercive with a student, they actually have more power and control, right? So that person uses that position to get what they want, right? So that can look so many different ways. But I also invite people to consider how, when you're feeling pressured to do something, how does that feel in your body? Right? The body is indeed a compass. Like when somebody's pressuring me to do something, I feel uneasy about it. And I don't feel as safe in that moment. I might feel kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Yeah. So again, the body is a compass. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
That does answer the question. Another thing I heard from your response is that sometimes people might be afraid to say no. Why do you think that people, women in particular, might be afraid of doing that, speaking up for themselves in those instances?
Yeah, well, consequences are a real thing, perceived consequences, natural consequences, and real ones, right? Ones that actually happen. I think so many of us in general as beings, it feels good to be liked. It feels good to make other people happy. And many of us, as young people, as young girls and young women, have been conditioned in this society that we live in to be people pleasers, right? We are raised to be selfless, to be considerate of other people's needs in front of our own, to quiet our voices in order to not make people uncomfortable. I'm really happy and excited about what your generation, how your generation is coming up, because you all are taking in all the lessons and all of the wisdom that we have and are passing down to you, and your voice, your collective voice is stronger. I'm so excited about that. And yet the conditioning is real, right? It's something that we all have to continue to be mindful of. How is what I'm doing in alignment with what I want to do, right? What I need to do for myself. Many of us aren't taught boundaries either, especially in families of color, Black and brown families. Yes. Most of the clients that I work with are in their late 20s to maybe like early 20s to 40s. And there are many people who come to therapy and are hearing about boundaries for the very first time, right? So I think a lot of it is about how we're brought up, how we're socialized as young people, as young women, to say yes, to be overly considerate, and how as young boys and young men, how there may be some confusion around what we have access to, right? So there's sometimes some entitlement to other people's bodies, spaces, and so on.
You were talking about boundaries, and I think, oh my gosh, I know my mom, she's gotten better with it. I'll admit, she's gotten better with it, but it can be scary to, just from my experiences, it can be scary to set boundaries just with your parents, because a lot of times, like, when you do it, they're like, well, I gave birth to you. I do all of this for you. I'm your mother. Like, you shouldn't have to worry about doing so-and-so with me, or I don't know, just like wanting your space or something. It can be scary to set boundaries. So I can see how that can, I don't know, cause an impact in your life to be afraid to set boundaries with other people.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said. It can be really scary to set boundaries, especially when it's unfamiliar or it means experiencing rejection or judgment. Or in this case, the example that you're giving, setting a boundary with a parent is hard, right? And that comes with its own set of consequences and emotions and potentially aftermath, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some tips I have around setting boundaries are to use I statements. We can begin boundary setting with, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now. I need some time to process this a little bit. I need a little bit of time to ground myself. I need a little bit of time to check in with how I'm feeling, right? So usually when we stick to our own experience and we share that with, this is how I'm feeling and this is what I'm needing, sometimes it lands a little bit better because people can relate to needing space, right? They know what it feels like to be overwhelmed. But sometimes when we communicate boundaries, it's not always going to land with the grace and ease that we want it to. And so I encourage people, to know that there's a process. If you haven't been setting boundaries and all of a sudden you do, there will be an adjustment. Your community, your loved ones will have to adjust to that. But, what I often encourage folks to do is stay with it. Stick to the boundary. Sometimes people are not going to like them, and that isn't our problem.
Correct. It isn't. I like that. Just sticking to your boundaries and everything. So how do you feel intersectionality plays a role when it comes to like the alarming statistics of, sexual abuse, especially with like Black women and other women of color?
Yes. Yeah, that part is so important and real, and so grounded in the context and history of this country, the history of colonization, right? So the more beautifully complex and rich we are in our identities, it seems that the target gets bigger, right? So being Black and woman and queer, for example, right? The rates of sexual assault, the prevalence of sexual assault for that group goes up. Being a trans Black woman,
Yeah.
those rates are off the charts. They are the most vulnerable group. And so, when I say it's connected to history and context, it's about this country being built on this ideology that our bodies are not valuable, that our bodies are commodities, that our bodies are objects, and thus people feel entitled to access them. This is also grounded in patriarchy, right? Patriarchy, racism, and colonization. And so with every added intersection, there is more vulnerability. And, it's not our fault. It's not our burden to carry, but it can be very scary. I think we have an opportunity to continue to speak about these experiences, what it's like to be a Black woman in this body. And also, the responsibility for us to course correct is on our entire society, right? There are things that we can do within our communities and difficult conversations that we need to have within the Black community, within the Brown community, within our Indigenous communities. This is something that many of us have learned from the patriarchy and colonization that we continue to reenact within our communities. And we have some work to do. We have some work to do around this for sure.
Yeah. What do you think that we can start doing inside of our households to, I don't know, make more progress?
Yeah. You know, I think this is really delicate to talk about, because there's also this idea and experience of ancestral and intergenerational trauma. This is the way that trauma is passed on from generation to generation. The ways in which our ancestors' stories live on in our DNA, for example, or, you know, in our blood and in some of our bodies' memories. It's that feeling of like, that has never happened to me, but it feels familiar in my body. Mm-hmm. So it's really delicate. With the numbers being what they are, 1 in 3 or 4 in general for women to experience some sort of sexual trauma in their lifetime, I believe that the number is higher, the prevalence is higher for communities of color. Mm-hmm. Most often we're not seeking help and we're not reporting, so the number is likely astronomically higher. What this also means is that anytime you're in a room with 3 or 4 women, there's at least 1 or 2 that have experienced sexual trauma. This is also potentially the case in our own homes. Our mommies, our aunties, our grandmothers, our sisters have likely experienced, our siblings, our kindred have likely experienced sexual trauma. And so it can be really hard navigating those conversations given the stigma, the secrecy. Those are the 2 pieces that I feel like are kind of doors and sort of like openings for us to start to have some of the conversations that are hard to work around, and with the stigma to name the secrecy. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we do so in spaces that we feel safe and trustworthy of, but it will take time, right? Someone may say, you know, to a family member, I had this conversation, or I saw this YouTube, or I heard this podcast, I wanted to share it with you. And I would love to talk about it with you after you listen, right? Sometimes we just have to be a little bit gentle in our approach like that. Whereas other families may speak more directly about it.
Right.
So, case by case, but there are openings. Naming the secrecy, talking about the stigma, and naming the fact that many women within a family can probably relate. Oftentimes.
Yeah. And so I guess like conversation is like the biggest key to doing it, normalizing it. How do you feel that certain communities can go about healing when it comes to things like this? Not communities, I mean people. How can people go about healing after experiencing these kind of things?
Yeah, well, interesting that you say communities, because I think it's both. Mm-hmm. Because of the things that we've talked about. There's the personal experience, and there's also the community level. Let me get some water. Mm-hmm. So, as I mentioned when we started, I believe that healing is most profound and oftentimes enduring when we approach it holistically. So that mind, body, heart, and spirit piece. And you probably heard me talk about this on the podcast that you listen to with Therapy for Black Girls. So the mind piece is the way that we think, the beliefs that we come to have based on our lived experience. The body is what I've been talking about throughout our time together, the ways the stories live on in the bodies, through body memories, through energy, physical health challenges and symptoms. The heart piece is the community piece. it's in part about how we love ourselves and relate to ourselves and how we relate to others. And then the spiritual piece is about our relationship to God, that which is greater than us, the elements, our higher self, whatever that might mean for a person. So when someone experiences sexual trauma, whether it's one time or many times, there is usually a rupture in each of those areas: mind, body, heart, and spirit. So I believe that it's important to incorporate all of those pieces, those parts of our human experience in our healing. So mind part may be like traditional talk therapy. The body may be like, I work with trauma-informed yoga, which helps to mend the mind-body relationship, and it also helps to calm the nervous system and support presence in the body. The heart part is having these conversations with our beloveds, with our families, and also like loving on ourselves and our inner child, right? And then the spirit piece is about like addressing any ruptures that have happened in relationship to our higher self or our God. Sometimes people may say things like, how, if there's a God, how could this have happened to me? How could God have allowed this to happen? Right. So that becomes a part of the healing process. Sometimes people might find that meditation or connecting with ancestors or prayer is a way to mend the relationship with spirit, with source, with higher power. So there are so many avenues to healing, and you might be inspired to listen to another episode. I had podcast episode on therapy for Black girls that is titled Healing Comes in All Forms, and I can share the episode with you to include in your show notes if you like. But it talks about holistic healing as an option. So many of us are also, sort of decolonizing our healing experience because we've been told therapy is for crazy people, right? Or like some of our indigenous and ancestral medicines being connected to our plant ancestors and plantitas that's like woo-woo, right? It's crazy. But there's so much support in the elements in natural medicine that can really, I would say support and bolster and sometimes elevate our healing if we can be open to it.
Yay. Well, thank you so much. Those were all of the questions. You answered all of them beautifully. After talking to you, I feel so calm and at ease.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shena, for being here. Can you please tell us your socials so that we can stay updated on you and your platform and any future projects that you may have?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I am on Instagram at Embodied Truth Healing, and I'll also include that. I'll send you a message. It's a long one, so everyone can have it, but it's at Embodied Truth Healing. And I have some lovely opportunities for people who want to be in the healing experience with me. I have a program called Healing on the Mat, which is actually created for Black, Indigenous, women of color who were also survivors of sexual assault. And it brings in all of these things that we've been talking about: creative, holistic self-study, guided meditation, and also trauma-informed yoga. This is a program that you can participate in on your own. It's self-paced. Everything's pre-recorded. You can sign up for it. The link is in my bio on Instagram. And you can always send me a message and ask me any questions you might have about that program.
Right, and I'll be sure to put the link in the description as well so people can go to that. And just to clear it up, is this kind of program, is it free? Does anybody have to buy anything to be a part of it?
Yeah, it does have a fee associated with it. It's there is a payment plan option. And so, but if people are really wanting to participate and they don't have the means, I operate on an honesty, integrity policy. So reach out to me and we'll see what we can do. If I have the space to adjust it, then I will, especially for your community. And you just go online, click on the link, and it'll tell you all you need to know about it.
All right, thank you so much. And guys, again, the resources are in the description box for you to look into it. All right, everyone, this is Power N Blaso. Thanks again, Dr. Shena, for being here.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Okay, bye.
Bye.